Hello, I'm Bill Goodman, Executive Director of Kentucky Humanities. Welcome to the 2020 Kentucky Book Festival Online. We're pleased you've taken time to join us for this special program that brings together authors, readers, and literary enthusiasts from across the country and the Commonwealth, just like we've done for 39 years. Today we'll be listening in on a fun conversation with several outstanding children's writers. Let's Do the Time Warp for Kids features George Ella Lyon, S.G. Wilson, and Kristin O'Donnell Tubb, in conversation with author Shawn Pryor. Thank you all for being here. Take it away, Shawn.
Thank you, Bill. My first question for everyone is that seeing that we all write for kids, we all write for kids and whatnot. As far as our process, as far as learning the process during our childhood, how did you learn story structure as a child?
I can jump right in on this one if that's okay with everyone else. I had a wonderful elementary school librarian. Her name was Sheila Rollins, is Sheila Rollins. We're still Facebook friends. And Sheila had this amazing program where if you read 3 books by an author and did a book report on each one, you could interview that author by telephone. And so in 6th grade, I got to interview, speaking of time travel, Madeleine L'Engle by telephone, author of A Wrinkle in Time. And I told her, I think I listened to her talk about wanting to be a writer, and it had always been something that sounded interesting. But when I heard her talking about wanting to be a writer, or her process as a writer, I knew that was a job for me. I knew that it sounded amazing. So I told her I wanted to be a writer, and she said, good for you, keep reading and you can do it. So in 6th grade, I kind of knew from that point forward that I wanted to try it because Madeleine L'Engle told me I could.
Excellent. SG, what about you?
Oh yeah, I think I remember also in elementary school, I learned a pretty valuable lesson about writing. It was actually in 1st grade, and we had a prompt to write about this illustration of a turtle kind of running to school with a bunch of pencils in his hand. And I kind of just added, we had to kind of like write a story around it, just a few sentences, but I made up a little twist where he ate the pencils because he was really hungry later at lunch because he lost his lunch or something. And it got a big laugh like from the teacher. So, and I'm sure she was humoring me, but it, kind of like tricked me into thinking that I had, some sort of creative talent, And so, but it's kind of a nice lesson about, kind of like throwing in a twist in a story. So I guess I, got me thinking more about what, the way stories work that way.
Excellent. Excellent. Georgella.
Well, I grew up in a house full of books and music, and my daddy loved poetry especially, and he read sometimes from a book of poems for adults called 101 Famous Poems that my parents got as a wedding gift. And they weren't poems for kids, and so I couldn't have told you exactly what they meant, but the feeling and the music was so strong. And I just thought, well, that's magic. And so it came to me when I was in the 3rd grade, and I had a feeling that was just too big for me, that I could make a poem out of that. And I remember the feeling was jealousy and envy of a girl down the street who got a purple bicycle for her birthday with streamers and a basket, a wicker basket.
I feel that.
You feel it? Yeah. And so I wrote this poem and gave myself this magic bicycle and all of this. And I found that I found something better than the bicycle in doing that. And so I've really been making poems ever since.
That is beautiful. That is really beautiful. I as a child, there was a kid down the street from me that had a big wheel, and it was a big wheel that had the that had like, it's kind of like the emergency brakes, but you could do a spin out. If you go real fast and you hit the emergency brake, you could spin out, after going down the street real fast. And I just had a regular big wheel. And every time I tried to just spin out without this emergency brake, I would literally just tumble the big wheel. every single time. And I used to get so mad about that. And it reminded me, just your story about the bike. You did something way more constructive than I did. And and I think that's absolutely great. For me, I learned about story structure during childhood, thanks to the newspaper comics. I started to like really pick up on reading heavily at the age of 3, because my mother and my father, they love to read, and they passed that down to me. And they just said, hey, we'll just start teaching. We're going to teach our son how to read, and at an early age. And they didn't have to push, because I was just as excited as they were. And so I read a lot of Peanuts, AKA Charlie Brown. And that was a pure delight to me. And I would say by like the age of 5, I really started to get this, okay, beginning, middle, end. It just wasn't about the joke at the end. It was more of, okay, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end. Okay, this is the basic fundamentals of a story. And it just excited me. It's like, oh, okay, we can go on journeys. We can do all these really cool things, but we did it in 3 panels. And that is just so cool. And then finding out, oh, there's more than this. There's also, children's storybooks, such as there's a Sesame Street storybook that to this day is still in print. It's Grover, the monster at the end of this book.
Oh, yes. Love that.
Which is one of the greatest breaking the fourth wall books of all time. And that book brought so much joy, because once again, it's a thing of, oh, I had no idea that we could tell stories like that in that format, or that we were allowed to do that. Because in childhood, you're hit with rules. There are rules for everything, in like, preschool, kindergarten, first, K through 6, just everything, rules. And reading that book as a child is like, wait a minute, there are no rules to writing. This is incredible. Then I tried to apply that to everything else in life at the age of 6. And my mother said, no, son, that life doesn't work that way.
Only get you so far.
Yes. So yes. But no, those are all really great, great introductions to get you all excited to writing, and to get you to where all you are, sorry, tongue tied, to get you to where all of you are today. And I find that to be absolutely incredible. Georgella, when you wrote Voices of Justice, you did like all these different types of poems, and they're beautifully illustrated as well. The illustrator, as a matter of fact, please give me one moment, because I don't like not mentioning the illustrator's name. I want to make sure that they get their props too. The illustrator, Jennifer M. Potter, you worked with Jennifer on this book. And so you're talking about history, but you're also bringing, the elements of poetry into it as well. And, so we're talking about history, we're talking about poetry, but we're also talking about very historical figures, and, and also historical figures of the future as well. And in this process, what was the process of, okay, who am I going to put into this book? And, how long did that process take? And also, what was it like to work alongside Jennifer M. Potter in making sure that the illustrations hold the same power and weight as your words do?
Wow, that's a huge bunch of questions. Both the editor, Christian Trimmer, and I came up with lists of possible people to write about. Mm-hmm. And then out of that, we tried to balance contemporary and historical. We tried to balance people in terms of color and age and location. We didn't want it to be limited or narrow in those ways. And I had already been working on a book called Poems for Peacemakers. that book didn't turn out, but I had already begun reading about some of these folks. And so that's how we got to the list of people. And then in terms of working with Jennifer, I never spoke with her. I've never met her. She's in San Francisco.
Yes.
But she was exceedingly flexible in letting the book develop, because originally it was supposed to be each spread would be a poem, a portrait on the left,
Yes.
and a poem on the right.
Okay.
So so we each got our separate space, but my poems wouldn't stay on their page, and they wouldn't stay in a column. You know, some of them just had to do other things, and she was willing to let the illustrations interact directly with the form of the poem, and that just made a huge difference, because it meant I could let the poem find its way, and I think that makes it closer to a picture book in places, because of the counterpoint.
Yes.
between the pictures and the words. I feel really fortunate, and of course the editor had to be flexible too, and then the book designer, especially with the round poem. They did try to talk me out of that, but
Oh yes. And that's the whole thing. I think sometimes a lot of people outside of book publishing and outside of other creative fields, you know, may not understand the process of putting a book together. And it doesn't matter what kind of book it is, whether it be a novel, whether it be poetry, whether it be a children's book, comic book, graphic novel, all that stuff. There is a process, and there are layers, and there are so many people involved in the process, you know, because we are still in this age of people thinking, oh, this is magic. And and it's not. It's layers of work, and you can tell when you read this book, Voices of Justice. It's there. I read it a couple of times last week, and I read it again this morning, and this is also the first time for me seeing a book that talks about James Baldwin. You know, we like outside of the book, outside of the creations that he made and the speeches that he made and the interviews that he made that you might see pasted everywhere on social media over like the last 10 years alone. I've seen tons of James Baldwin interviews on social media, and you know, and that's how a lot of today's youth know of James Baldwin, not from his books, but from his interviews. Yeah. But for me, it's rare to see a picture book that has James Baldwin in it, and to see that alongside the poem was very beautiful, and I just was completely blown away by it, and I was blown away by the entire book as a whole. So yeah, I was just really curious to that whole creative process, and speaking of creative processes, S.G. Wilson with Me Versus the Multiverse.
Right.
Pleased to meet me. I have a copy of it. Right here.
So I'll hold mine up too.
Yeah, there you go. Now with that, like that Me Versus the Multiverse, you're stretching into an area where, like say for instance, you know, relating it to television, where like a lot of kids and adults who watch superhero shows like Arrow or all the CW superheroes being in a multiverse, coming from different universes, different times, different eras and whatnot. And me growing up reading comics and knowing of like superheroes and things from other dimensions and parallel universes and whatnot. What types of things interested you in creating a book like this? And what was, as far as the process of working with an editor on this book, were there any moments of, I don't want to say confusion, but challenges? That's the word I was looking for, challenges.
Oh yeah.
What challenges did you have in writing a book like this?
Yeah. Well, you know, the book is about a boy who goes to a convention for his duplicates from parallel Earths.
Yes.
So he meets all these different versions of himself, like, Cowboy Me, where history was, he hasn't gone past the Old West, much in America, and or Disco Me, where they're still kind of stuck in the 70s, So that's where kind of the history ties in a bit. But he meets all these different versions of himself, and I always loved those types of stories in ever since like that early Star Trek, which I would see in reruns, where they go to the mirror universe where everybody's evil and Spock has a goatee,
Yes.
And then I also read a lot of comic books, and my favorite comics though were in the Justice League. They would meet their alternate versions from another Earth, but they would, every time, they would kind of get together and have a reunion every so often. And whenever they did, they would just have kind of hang out and chat at their headquarters for a while. And then they'd go and have an adventure and fight some villain. But I always just loved the part at the beginning where they would talk and just trade notes, like the two Supermen would talk about like, well, I'm married to Lois Lane. Well, I'm just kind of dating her right now. I just love those conversations. And I wish they would have gone on longer. I don't even remember who they actually fought or what villains they fought. I just like so I thought it'd be funny to have a convention where you just hang around talking to your alternate versions. And of course there was a plot that kicks in, and that is actually where things got hard. I had a lot of fun just writing the beginning where they're just hanging out talking. But then when I actually had to, kind of get the story moving, it was pretty tricky to kind of, because since it's about, the multiverse is infinite. So I had these infinite story options. So it was really hard to narrow them down. And I tried a lot of different things. And my agent was really helpful in just kind of recommending at one point, just cut out the last half and just start over with the last half. And he was totally right. And then my editor helped me to further kind of, not exactly simplify things, but just, make sure that things were kind of staying a little more focused.
Yes.
So in my particular case, it was a matter of setting. I had him bopping around all over the multiverse to different Earths, and I changed it so that he mainly goes to a few and then meets a lot of people from other ones, if that makes any sense.
Oh, no,
So,
it makes perfect sense.
So basically, I think I had just had too many options when I was, I'd come up with a concept that maybe could have gone in way too many directions, and I had to just find one and stick with it. So.
Oh, no. Sometimes it's better to have options than no options at all.
Yeah, right. Well, you were talking about illustrators, and
yes.
really interesting with Georgella. One thing that with me was that I had this great illustrator who named Alexei Bitskov, and he is from Estonia and he lives in London. And when he came up with the cover concepts, the novel wasn't completely finished. It was, still in the early proofing stages. It hadn't even been laid out yet, I guess. So I liked some of his, some of the duplicates that he made prominent. I liked them so much that I kind of gave them a little bit more. They were kind of the minor characters, but I kind of gave them a little more background attention. And I made them more prominent in the second book, which is coming out like next year. So in that way, and I've also had some nice chats with him. I don't really talk to him about work stuff, but we've chatted a bit, online and stuff, but anyway, more like as a fan talking to him. So in a way the illustrator also affected this, even though it's not an illustrated book or anything, just has some illustrations aside.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but still, it definitely made a difference in the story that you told, though.
Yeah. So it's definitely agent, editor, and illustrator all, had some influence for sure. So.
Awesome. And one day, SG, because you're talking about how superheroes would meet up and just talk.
Yeah.
Did you ever read? There's an issue of Avengers, and I won't take long with this. There's an issue of Avengers. It was an annual from back in the '80s, where the Avengers, the West Coast Avengers, and the Avengers from the East Coast, they would play a game of softball.
Oh yeah.
They would play a game of softball, and then once again, a villain shows up, and I'm like, "Yo, the softball game is actually really cool. Can we just go back to the softball game? That was
exactly.
awesome."
Yeah.
I'm like,
we'll break up a softball game.
Right. I just want to see if Hawkeye can hit a fastball from Thor. That's all I really want to see.
Right.
So
that's a good point.
Yes. But
there's never any winner, I guess, huh?
Oh no, never,
That's
never.
really
The
good.
winner's supposed to be the reader because the good guys won and the bad guys lost. But
Right, yeah, I
no,
guess.
we did not get to see the game. But
Right.
but no. Moving on to Kristin O'Donnell Tubb. Her book, The Storyseeker, a New York public library book. Now, with your book, you're also dealing with history. You're also dealing with history, and you're also dealing with a very prominent piece of history, the New York Public Library.
Yes.
And so, what type of now with your book, you're also doing research, and
Yes.
but within that research, you're also creating a universe as well. So, what kind of process, what kind of process did you have to have in building not only this universe, but trying to make it coincide with the realities of the New York Public Library history?
I first of all, I love research. Research is my favorite part of the whole process
Yes.
because it is the only part that I feel like I can truly control. I think I really love uncovering little known facts about events, or in this case, buildings. And so I really love the research. And for me, I don't know that I would be a very good plotter without research. I really rely on my research to help me plot the storyline. So yeah, for Storyseeker, I was able to travel to the New York Public Library, and I got 2 private tours, one for the Story Collector, which was the original book in the series. And then of course the story sequel came out in January as the Storyseeker as the sequel in January. So I got to have private tours of the New York Public Library, which was built in 1911. And so it was a behind the scenes tour where really mostly only the staff goes. And the reason why is because the main character of these stories is Viviane Fiedler. And she was a young girl who was born and raised inside the New York Public Library. Until she was 15 years old, she lived in an 8-room apartment on the 2nd floor with her brothers and her mom and dad. Her dad, John Fiedler, was the building superintendent. So I work with the same publisher, I believe, as George Ella on these books. And so when they asked me to kind of think about what it would be like to live inside the library, at that point, you realize that the library is almost its own character. Because the setting is what makes this family and their upbringing very unique. So I kind of approached the research as what makes this library unique, what makes it come alive, those kinds of questions. So it was a ton of fun. And so the Story Collector came out in 2018. And so the Storyseeker came out of the research that I did for that book, because in World War I, the library was used quite a bit for its renowned map collection.
Yes.
They have a map collection that really is kind of unparalleled, really, in public libraries around the world. And so people were coming from around the world, these scholars, these military experts, to study these maps. And they also, there's these private rooms that you can reserve inside the library. And it was later discovered that many secret codes were probably developed inside the library during all of these, while they were studying these maps. So the Storyseeker is a story about codes and cracking codes and what that looks like. So the research directly developed that book.
That's amazing. Because that's very intricate. That's very intricate, and that's also very layered. Like seriously, because like one book alone helped create the next book without you knowing that it was going to create the next book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like that is.
I was very lucky that way.
Yeah, yes, but no, it's awesome though. It's awesome, and that's the great thing about creativity. You never know what's going to spur the next thing,
Right.
and it's fantastic. With me, currently have a book out. Nat Turner's Rebellion. It's a graphic novel, part of Capstone's graphic library collection. And it's also part of their, I think, Movements and Moments compilation as well. And I had about 26, 27 pages to tell the story of Nat Turner's Rebellion and how this man thought that he was chosen by God to make sure that Black people were free and free from slavery and given the same equal rights as everyone else. And even if they had to fight for it, even if they had to kill for it, he was going to make sure that this was going to happen. And so having to tell a story that, if you really think about it, doesn't go over a very long period of time, because that rebellion was quite short, but there's still a long buildup.
Yeah.
And to try to squeeze all that in historically within 28 pages, and then you have supplemental material, was such a challenge, because you're trying to look at all these different historical texts, and peer reviews and all these other things, trying to put all this together. And also at the same time, remember, this is for kids. Because I'm like, okay, we're talking about a rebellion. We're talking about people dying. We're talking about people being shot. We're talking about people being stabbed. And it's like, how can you do this in a way that makes people understand that, like, slavery is not good. People, Black people deserve to be free. And so if they fight for these rights, if they fight, then there's nothing wrong for them fighting for these rights. And also making them understand that the violence that they received, and also the xenophobia and paranoia from white people during that time, was immensely outrageous, from all perspectives, not just from like the general public, but also from government and everywhere. And it was so much to put together, and I was excited to do it. And it's just like, how do you put this together? How do you layer this? So I remember writing the script out, send the script off. It would come back, say, okay, you need to double check your sources here. You need to double check your sources there, because they had their editor, and then their editor had a historical editor, and then that historical editor had a professor, and then that professor had another editor. And so you're going through all these layers, because you have to make sure you are as correct as you possibly can be. There can be no half-stepping with history. You either tell the complete truth, or you can't tell it at all.
We hope, for sure.
We hope. Yes, that's very true. We hope. And so I want to say, I think it was after about 4 edits that the script was completely polished. It was completely done. The little hair that you see on my head is still what's left, many months later after doing that book. But then it went to artist DB Silvio. And I did not know DB. I've never met DB. As someone that has worked writing graphic novels and writing single issue comics and things like that, I'm familiar with the process. How things are broken down. But once I saw his artwork, even though I've done this before, at the same time, it was that moment where I was like, oh, this is real. Yeah. And this is actually happening. And I'm like, this is actual history that I got to tell, and I got to work with somebody really awesome and talented to express all of this. And kids will read this. This will be in libraries at schools. This is history that honestly needs to be taught. Because there's so much history that we either sugarcoat or we just don't talk about. And so history ends up repeating itself because of it. And so being able to be a part of that process to get this out here, as strenuous and stressful as it was, because it was stressful.
Right.
Because the last thing you want to do is make a mistake and then that mistake gets published, because you're never going to hear the end of it. Even if you meant well, you have to make sure that, that everything, that the P's and Q's are correct, and the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And that was an incredible process, and it's something I'll never forget. Please believe I will never, ever, ever forget. So yes.
Was there a point where you finally felt comfortable with, everything you were saying, and were you ready before everybody else was, or?
I honestly, in all sincerity, the very first draft, I remember my editor brought it back and told me, she was like, no, you have to go in further. And I was originally writing it as, okay, we're writing this for kids, so I have to tone it down. And she was like, no, you have to let them know what happened. And visually,
That's a good editor.
oh yeah.
That's a good editor.
Julie Gassman, I believe from Capstone, was my editor for that. And I remember her telling me, she's like, you have to go in, because she said, we can, it will be illustrated in a way that we will see violence, but we will see violence, and that violence won't be candy coated, but it's not going to be violence for violence sake. It's violence to show you actual history.
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, great. I was like, once I knew that I could just tell it, they would let me then know if I was going too far. And that was the key for me. So in all honesty, draft 4, the fourth go around, that's when I honestly really felt comfortable, because I think I was finally comfortable with all the material. I was finally comfortable with what all the editors needed to see, and also comfortable in my ability to tell that story, because it's something I've never done before, ever. So again, that was the moment. The fourth draft was the moment. And after that, like I said, hair remains short.
Right.
The hair remains short. Now,
thank you for telling stories like that. You're exactly right. Those are the stories that need to be taught, or else, and Georgella's, and or else we're going to continue repeating.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Like I said, I've never ever done anything like that before, and that was a challenge. That was a major challenge for me. Like, I like writing about all types of things. And as we're on this panel, we all have different imaginations, and we all tell stories in different ways. And so to, like I said, be presented something like that was like I said, it was a moment I'll never forget. It's a lesson I'll never forget. And I hope that, that book, just like all of your books, get into as many hands as possible, to inspire people. Now, let's see, how many minutes do we have left before questions? Okay, we got time for one more question before we get to audience questions. Inspirations. I think that's something that, like, I know a lot of us may have been asked on panels before, but I always like to ask people, creatives, everyone, like, who are inspirations, to you, like, for your creative process, like, outside of the, like, the people, like, say, for instance, with Kristin, talked about the librarian and whatnot, and Georgella, you talked about, the poetry books that you received that inspired you to write, and also inspired you to write about your magical bicycle. And SG, you talked about the comic books, that you read and stuff like that. Like, were there any creatives that inspired you in your creative process? And I would like to start with Georgella, and then go to SG, and then go to Kristin, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I just wanted to say it was fascinating to hear what you said about your book about Nat Turner, and it seems to me that when we revise, that part of us gets revised in the process, and that's why it takes so long.
Yes.
Yes. We have so much to learn, and there's so much becoming as we come closer to where the book is going to be, or the poem is going to be. Mm-hmm. And the research opens the way, for that. I was really lucky, blessed to have a teacher, a creative writing teacher in high school, but I knew her all my life. She was at the church door when I was carried in at 3 weeks old. So, that was kind of a receiving by a poet. She was a poet. And after I was in her class, she said, anytime you write something, I'd be happy to look at it. So she was my mentor from then on, and we were friends for the rest of her life. And I can't imagine the difficulty of envisioning myself becoming a poet without someone right there I knew who had a family and taught and did all these things, but always poetry was at the center for her. So that helped me imagine and envision and work. And then I was so fortunate to go to Indiana University as a graduate student, and I studied with Ruth Stone, whose book has just come out, The Essential Ruth Stone. She's a woman who won the National Book Award, I think when she was 92. She was, the very first day of our seminar, she came in, said, "My name is Ruth Stone, and here is my poem." And she said this poem called Advice. And I knew when I heard that poem, this woman is going to change my life. And she did. And we continued our friendship. And I know she did so much for so many and all the different places that she taught. And I was learning things about teaching from her too, you know, so, and then, I mean, I've just been, in some ways, I feel like I've been hand carried, you know, there's been someone who reached out to me and at every stage. And I married a musician. So I'm living with another creative person, you know, and we understand each other. And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, for me, I had a really great teacher in high school who was very inspiring. I had some fairly uninspiring teachers in middle school that almost scared me away from writing.
Yes.
You know, because I had actually written to, I wasn't lucky enough to call her, but I wrote to Beverly Cleary as part of a class assignment in third grade. And she said, you know, I don't know what I said to her, but she wrote, I still have the letter somewhere. And she says, you know, "Congratulations on wanting to be a writer, you know, good luck," or whatever. And then I hit a bit of a lull in middle school because of these, you know, bad teachers. But then I had this great teacher, freshman and sophomore year, who really, you know, encouraged me. So, but then later, after college, I started writing for magazines, and I tried to, anytime I had a chance to interview an author, I would try to do that. And I got to interview Mark Lehner, the sort of the humor writer. And he told me that when he was starting out, he worked for a moving company and would just think of stuff he wanted to write about. And he didn't have in those days, he didn't have a phone or tape recorder to record his thoughts, or he couldn't write anything down either because he was so busy. So he would just memorize everything he wanted to write. And then he'd go home and write all night, you know, from memory. So I was kind of like, you know, well, if he could do that, I have no excuses not to try to write, you know, because, you know, I'd always wanted to write from these earlier experiences, but then finally doing it, I felt like I had no excuse anymore after talking to him. So.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. Go ahead, Kristin.
That's SG. I love Beverly Cleary too. She was one of my favorites. Loved her.
Right.
Madeleine L'Engle, Judy Blume. These were the ones that I read, of course, growing up. And Judy Blume wrote, I think it might be her only historical fiction for kids, called Starring Sally J. Friedman as Herself. And I read that book until the cover fell off. I loved it so much. And I really think that's probably why I love historical fiction today, is that book. I also, Shawn, loved Charles Schultz in the Peanuts comics. Those were very much, I would trace them and then try to draw them freehand, all that good stuff. I do want to say that I feel like I've learned a lot from my writing peers. I'm a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI.
Okay.
And it's an amazing group of writers and illustrators. And I think reading them and getting critiques from them, I really have grown so much as a writer, knowing them and seeing them work and hearing what their processes are. I think it's just fascinating. And I really am very grateful to that organization for sure.
Awesome. Okay. Let's see. I'll try to make this quick. I'll try to make this quick. Like yourself, Charles Schultz was a very big inspiration for me. Charles Schultz, like a lot of the newspaper comic artists slash creatives, Charles Schultz, Jim Davis, Garfield. Garfield was my life as a child. I loved Garfield. Anytime there was a Garfield strip, I cut it out the newspaper. If Garfield was on TV, and we had like one TV in the house, no one was allowed to turn on. No one was allowed to turn the TV. Garfield special was on, and it's Garfield time. But like those, like as a child, it went from Charles Schultz, Jim Davis. Comics were, like I said, comic books were very heavy part of my reading as a kid, even through my teenage years to now. I read a lot of Iron Man comics as a child, and there was a gentleman by the name of Denny O'Neil, who also wrote Batman prominently for a good period of time in the 70s. I want to also say the 80s. And he wrote a run where James Rhodes, a black man, was Iron Man, and he took the place of Tony Stark. That's where I really started to read Iron Man. And that was also the first time that I saw somebody that looked like me be one of the powerhouse superheroes. And as I got older, I realized that Denny O'Neil was writing a story about a black man being a superhero that you never saw his face, you never saw who he was, but it's still a black man portraying a superhero that everybody still thinks is a white guy, while also at the same time there's superheroes that don't know that it's James Rhodes. So he has to be somebody else to be somebody else. And it's really this multi-layered story about being black in white America, but like still being seen as a hero until they find out who you are. And it really just, it got me as a kid. It still gets me to this day. Because it's not written like that. It's not written like that. You just think it's just regular superhero comics, but it's really once again, one of my favorite words, layered. And so like stuff like that. But also a lot of Walter Mosley. Black Betty's one of my favorite books. I love that book. My best friend Chris, may he rest in peace, he gave me a copy of that when we were in college, and to this day it's still part of my collection, and it's also part of my library of books that I've bought over the last 10 years that I really should read, but you know what, I just love buying more books. So yes, but now we do have some questions before we wrap up today. I'm going to put on my reading glasses, so please pay no attention to the glare. The first question is, how has the use of technology by kids changed the way you write science/social studies content? We'll go with Kristin, and then go to SG, and then go to George Ella.
That's a great question. And I'm really excited to hear SG's answer on this one for sure. I think for me, especially in the Story Collector and Storyseeker, one of the big themes in these books is how valuable books were. Of course, they still are, but books used to be the only place where you could find certain types of information. So, and only in certain locations and in certain libraries. So like the New York Public Library, when they had what they called a rare book in 1934, that literally may have been the only place where that piece of knowledge existed. So that's something that I tried really hard to get across in these books, is what knowledge looked like then and what knowledge seeking looked like then versus what it looks like now. It's very, very different.
Yeah, I certainly miss those days. I'm actually sitting right next to a card catalog. Well, let me just.
Yay!
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It holds a bunch of knickknacks.
Yeah.
But we got it at an auction, and because my wife and I both love that kind of stuff, And I remember learning the Dewey Decimal System and just loving it. So I kind of miss it for sure. But as far as me versus the multiverse, I kind of figure a lot of kids are pretty savvy with technology. So I had I have them go to an alternate Earth where technology is more advanced. So I try to just kind of throw in a lot of jokes about different tablets and self-driving cars. And it's all a bunch of, the character is very confused and, has a lot of mishaps with all the technology. Drones are coming after him, just to deliver stuff to him, that kind of thing. So I figure kids would be pretty savvy and would kind of appreciate maybe that sort of technology jokes. So yeah, for me, it was just kind of like assuming my audience as kids, as technologically savvy kids, would kind of get it, and maybe appreciate that. So.
I want to say that talking about the Dewey Decimal System, you can't really reminisce about the Dewey Decimal System to everybody, but I look at the clock and it says 8:11, and I think modern American poetry. My house number is 913. It's the call number for archaeology. So and I haven't formed that kind of relationship with the Library of Congress system.
I'm just showing this the opening to every chapter.
Isn't that great?
Decimal number.
Great, yeah.
I love it. And I miss the physicality of the card catalog. That's a very beautiful thing to have.
Yeah.
When I was working on Voices of Justice, I found so many resources online. And one of the poems, which is about the students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and the massacre there, the Parkland, Florida massacre. But they're creating the March for Our Lives through, along with the Peace Wars of Chicago. So much of that they couldn't have organized that. They couldn't have gathered that support. And had they not been able to reach out in a virtual way. And it's really powerful to think and the tools we're using now, we're using this moment as we go into the election, which is 3 weeks from today. But the last words of the poem are, well, help get the word out, #never again, #enough is enough. And those words become powerful, they become sacred, those hashtags. And of course, and kids, when I go in schools, back when I went in schools, but kids were always helping me with whatever thing I was trying to do technologically. So it was always a bond that they knew I needed them, and I hoped they needed me.
No, it's a continuing circle. It's a continuing circle, and we all have to hold each other's hands to get through it.
Right.
Through all of it. For me, it was the thing of with technology, like with writing the Nat Turner Rebellion. A kid could easily just go to Wikipedia or go to history.com or go to any type of historical factual site on the internet just to learn about the history. But it became a thing. I was like, okay, I once again have to go deeper than what a base explanation is, and like that was a challenge and a change for me, because I never had done a historical graphic novel before. And so it's just not, okay, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. No. We also have to convey feelings and thoughts and emotions, and you have to kind of like speak for Nat Turner, because there's all these panels, and it's not going to be just all captioned, this is what happened next, and this is how these people were feeling, so you just say, okay, no, right here, we would, Nat Turner would probably say, we deserve to be free. You have to fight for your freedom, because they're not going to fight for you. So are you going to stand with us or not? Now, if you're not going to stand with us, then you need to get out of the way. So like trying to expand on the context of just facts while making sure that it stays factual, was a major challenge, because like I said, with kids and technology, they can go look up anything. whether it be right or wrong, whether it be truth, whether it be fact or fiction, they can go look up anything at like the drop of a dime. I grew up in the Dewey Decimal System as well. I remember having tests in grade school about the Dewey Decimal System, and I couldn't stand those tests. I love the Dewey Decimal System because I just thought it was a cool thing to say, and I just love pulling out the card catalogs and just filing through them because it's like, okay, what are we looking at? Okay, oh, that sounds cool. Can I get this book? Can I get this book? And just, there was that feeling of discovery. Now, discovery has been replaced by algorithms. Mm-hmm. And so, so now we aren't discovering as much as being led to, as being led to. So really like that's a major change. Oh, we have another question. Let's put the glasses back on again. Okay. For all authors, could you tell us about your next book or project? And we'll reverse the circle this time, and we'll start with George Ella, and then we'll finish with Kristin.
Well, I have a book of poems for adults that's coming out next year called Back to the Light. And it's a journey from seeing a child at a school where I was speaking, a child I was very worried about. And that first poem ends, "Come back when you've got something to say that helps." And so the whole book then is trying to say something helpful to that child and to the child in me she called up. So that's in the works. And I also have a book that's going to be reprinted next year by the University Press of Kentucky. And it's called Which Side Are You On? The Story of a Song. And it's about Florence Reese, who was living in my home county of Harlan in the mountains, the coal fields, in 1931 during a strike for workers' rights. And while her husband had gone out of the county because he worked for the union and he was going to be killed, she and the children were at home. And while their coal camp house was being shot up, the kids were under the bed, and she was writing the words to Which Side Are You on the back of a calendar page. And that song became an anthem of struggle all over the world. I mean, it's used, you can find it, being used today. So I'm really happy that that's coming back into print. I feel like it's we need our unions. We need to band together, just as you were saying. And like you were saying about the story of Nat Turner, there are very scary things in there. It's very, and so it's not a book for first grade, but picture books do go farther than that, and kids experience all kinds of violence in their own lives, and you can't protect people from things they're going through. So you have to find where the audience is. But I think it's another story of someone finding a voice and giving a voice that's still being heard.
Wonderful.
Great. That sounds great. I'm doing the next book in the Me versus the Multiverse series. This one's called Pleased to Meet Me, the first one. The next one is Enough About Me. And there's a cover that I can't show it yet. So, and it's going to be kind of like the characters in here are going to try to get a little more serious. This one is more of a romp, but the next one is still supposed to be funny, but they're going to try to actually use their ability to go to the different places to try to actually help all the different Earths. And it may work out, it may not, for them. It's all up in the air. So, and then, I'm kind of working on another series that's more about magic, but it's also middle grade. So.
SG, I love your title.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
That's a great title.
Yeah, thanks.
I have Zeus Dog of Chaos came out also this year. This one came out in June. So I have been promoting this one quite a bit. It is about a German Shepherd who is a diabetic alert dog, told from the German Shepherd's point of view. It's a companion novel to A Dog Like Daisy. So I'm having a lot of fun living in dog world. And then my next book that comes out in 2021 is called Luna Howls at the Moon, which is also a dog book. It is a told from a therapy dog's point of view.
Awesome. That's we have two dogs in our house. So one 10-month-old lab and a 2-year-old lab, and needless to say, they own this house now. I'm just here to pay the bills, and and so like I love that that dogs get to that you get to tell stories about dogs and whatnot.
I love it. I have 3 also. Yes. And
Yes.
I do a lot of research by just watching them and thinking and doing goofy voices for them.
Yes. Okay. I am told that we are good to go to wrap it up, but before we go, this is what I'm currently working on. I'm currently working on a Jake Maddox sports book, sports pros for kids, dealing with football and one of my favorite positions of all time, the quarterback. So I'm writing one of those right now for them. Also for Capstone, I'm writing a scary graphic novel story that deals with BMX racing. So I get to go back into my 80s grab bag and think about old movies like BMX Bandits, but make them scary for kids. And then also writing a children's book, the children's book for the kids sports stories line for Capstone as well. I'm also currently putting together a sports-based graphic novel series with artist Courtney Hawn, working on right now. Hopefully it will have a home soon, fingers crossed. And also working on a graphic novel project with co-writer Jenilyn Wright and artist Kelly Guillory. It's more for the teens and the adults. I say it's a mix of Days of Thunder meets The Transporter, and we'll be kickstarting the second chapter in early November for that, to crowdfund money for that. So my time is taken, but I will continue to write. And I'll write as much as I can until I can't write anymore. But but no, Georgella, SG, Kristin, thank you all for being a part of this panel. I had a wonderful time, and I hope you all did as well. And thank you, the viewer, for being here as well and enjoying this. I hope you had a wonderful time. Hopefully we can do this again sometime in the future. And I wish you all well. And congratulations to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Shawn.
All right.
Great.
Have a good one.
We want to thank Georgella, SG, Kristin, and Shawn for sharing their talents and insights with us today. We also want to thank you for joining us for this 2020 Kentucky Book Festival online event. If you're interested in purchasing one of the books discussed today, please visit our independent bookstore partner, Joseph Beth Booksellers, at josephbeth.com. For a complete schedule of Kentucky Book Festival conversations, visit kyhumanities.org and follow us on social media at kyhumanities. For Kentucky Humanities, I'm Bill Goodman.